Hey everyone, and welcome back to the MERN Stack Crash Course. In this episode, we're going to finish up with authorization and learn how to properly authorize parts of our web app. We're going to make sure people who aren't logged in can't access our site or do things they aren't allowed to. This is a super important and crucial part of web security. I'm not going to cover everything relating to security, but we'll cover at least a few basic things. When we left off last episode, we had just added our authentication token into the session storage container of the client's browser. The reason for this was twofold. First, it'll allow us to restrict access to pages based on whether this token is valid or not. Second, it'll allow us to decode the token and extract the user information from it, in case we need to have the user information for something like a profile page, which we'll actually develop at the end of the episode. Let's first start with restricting access to each of the pages on our site for people that aren't logged in. There's technically a couple of different ways we could go about doing this. The first thought that might come to your head is, let's just add a user to our session storage here, and if the user isn't in here, then we just redirect back to the landing page and then force them to log in. This might sound reasonable, but remember, users can edit their own session storage, so this isn't super secure because somebody could technically game it. Realistically, the only way to ensure true security would be to send our token to our backend, where we can verify it and then perform the backend functions that we need to, like creating, updating, deleting, etc. What this means is that we need some sort of middleware that intercepts the request before it gets to the backend that will handle the verification. If it goes through just fine, then it can proceed to the backend. Otherwise, we should not let the backend routes get called at all. And there's actually a pretty straightforward way to do this. In our front end, we'll need to add our authentication token into our Axios request headers. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to our login page here. And when we do that, every time we call a backend function, it'll get the authentication token. Let's do that first before we do anything else involving the backend. It's only one line of code, technically two if you're counting the import line, but we can knock it out really easily. All we need to do is in this login file, let's go up to the top here, and let's import Axios from Axios. Remember, Axios is the library that we're using to call our backend routes. Now let's scroll back down to where we're getting the login here into this handle submit function. And now if this went through successfully, in addition to sending our token to the session storage, let's write one line to add it to all future Axios requests. All we need to write is axios.defaults.headers.common, and then we're going to make a field called authorization. And then we're going to set it equal. And here is where we normally pass in our token. So right here, this actually kind of looks like a lot of writing here. But all of this line is doing right here is basically just making an authorization field in every single Axios request header, and it makes it the default. So you don't have to specify this authorization header every single time we send an Axios request. Now you'd think I would just insert in the token itself, which is stored in the response like this, but there's a formatting rule whenever you handle authentication tokens that you typically have the word bearer before the token. So I'm actually going to do a backtick character here, and I'm going to put this in like a JavaScript expression. And then in front of it, I'm going to put the word bearer just spelled like this. So if, for instance, our token was, let's just say 12345, then this would be bearer space 12345. And again, adding this bearer is just kind of a formatting thing, and it's kind of just a norm. And that's all it takes to make sure we're passing down our authentication token every single time we send an Axios request. So all these requests we're making in our API file right here to our backend are now going to have an authorization attached to the header, which will help us authenticate in the backend. So we'll go ahead and go over and save this login file here. And now that we've taken care of the front end part, let's actually head into the backend, and we're going to create some middleware that will verify that the authentication token is valid. And we're going to go ahead and start with our postroutes.js file. We do not want users to be able to interact with any of these routes at all if they haven't logged in yet. That means they shouldn't be able to retrieve the routes, create them, edit them, or whatever if they haven't logged in. And we're going to handle this through what we call middleware. And Express is actually a framework built for middleware and actually makes it pretty simple to handle something like this. Basically, we just need to write a function that will verify that the token is legit. And then we will add this function to every single route as a sort of checking mechanism. So let's, at the very bottom of this file, create a new function. I'm going to call it, say, function verify token. Just like every time we're calling a route, we need to give two arguments right here. We need to give the request as well as the response. For this function in particular, which is special, we'll also add a third argument, which we're just calling next. This third argument next, when using the context of Express, is just a function that basically says, okay, we're good to proceed to the next step. Meaning if it ends up going through that our verification is good, we can call this next argument here as a function, and that will send us to our backend routes where we can proceed. The first thing we need to do in this function is extract the token from the request header, because again, remember, whenever we did this thing in our login file, we are adding our token to this authorization header in Axios. So whenever we receive the request in the backend, we want to pull that token out of the authorization header. We can do that by simply just writing const. I'll make a variable, call it auth headers. I'm going to set it equal to request.headers, and it was titled authorization, spelled just like this. This will return to us the string that says bearer and then the token itself. We don't care about the bearer part of the token, so let's just extract the token itself from this header and ignore the bearer. We can do that by simply writing const token equals auth headers double ampersand auth header dot split. And then what we're going to do is split this string that we got from the header. We're going to split it by its white space, and then we're going to take the first index. All that this line is doing is saying if auth headers is found, then we're going to split auth headers by its white space and take the first index. So if I were, for instance, to have a token that says like bearer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whenever we call this split method, bearer would be stored in index 0 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be stored in index 1. Hence why we're taking index 1, because we just want the token, not this bearer part. If all goes well, this token variable right here should store our authentication token in it. If this doesn't store the authentication token, that would mean that the authentication token isn't included in the request header from the front end, which would then imply that whoever is sending the request is not actually logged in, because as soon as we log in, we set that header. So let's actually check for that. Let's say if not token, meaning the token doesn't exist, let's return a response that says the user isn't authorized. We'll just write return response.status, and we're going to give it a status of 401, because in HTTP, 401 means you're not authenticated. And then just like normal, we'll call .json, and then we're going to pass in just a message for right now. And for the message, we'll just say authentication token is missing, because after all, that's the only way this if statement would get triggered. Now that we've taken care of this case, what do we do if the token is not missing? Well, now the next step is to check if it is a valid token or not. If it is not, we need to do a similar thing like we're doing right here and just return an error response and tell the front end that something went wrong. And here is actually where our secret key that we made when we first signed the token finally comes into play. This is where we can call a method called verify, again from JSON Web Token, and we just pass in the token along with a secret key. If the two are compatible, we'll be good to go. Otherwise, there'll be a problem. First things first, let's import JSON Web Token into this file by going up here and writing const jwt equals require and redo JSON Web Token. Next, because I'm wanting to access our environment variables, namely the secret key, I'm actually going to go into our user routes here. I'm going to take this line that we copy and pasted from before. I'm going to do it again in this file just so we have this configuration set up, just so we can now access the secret key from our config.env file. Once both these things are done, we can get moving. Let's go back down now into the verify token, and let's call that verify method that I was just talking about. To do that, all we need to do is type jwt.verify. The first thing we need to pass in is the authentication token, which is just stored in token. And the second thing is the secret key, which again, when working with environment variables using this .env package, is process.env. whatever the name of the variable is, which in our case is secret key. Next, to streamline this process, we want to pass in a callback function that runs whenever this verify method goes through, and that'll actually be a third argument. So we're going to go ahead and make it an error function. We're going to give it 2 arguments, and I'll explain these in just a second. We're going to say error and user. We're going to do an arrow and have this callback function written here. Basically what this callback function is it's a function that is going to run no matter what after this verify function is done running. If the verify did not go through correctly, we'll have something here in this error argument. If it did go through correctly, we'll have something here in this user argument, which is just the decoded user information from the token itself. First, we'll handle the case where the verification didn't succeed. So we'll go in here and we'll say if error, meaning the token was not valid, what we're going to do is kind of like we're doing up here with this return. We're going to say, I'm actually going to copy and paste this so it's a little less writing. I'm going to paste this in here. And then instead of returning a 401, I'm actually going to return a 403 because in HTTP, 403 means that it got the token, but it doesn't accept that it's valid. And then for our message here, I'm going to say exactly that. I'm just going to say invalid token. Next, let's handle the case where the token actually is valid, which we can just write after this if statement here. We don't actually need an else here because we're already returning if we hit this if statement. So I don't need an else statement here. I can just put it down at the bottom. Theoretically, at least for these blog post routes, we shouldn't need the user information like this right here when interacting with any of the posts. However, just in case, I'm going to set the request body to actually include the user. So I'm going to say request.body.user equals user. Meaning, if the token validation did go through, we'll add this user object to the request body in case we do need to use it. And then the very last thing we need to do here is just call next as if it's a function. And this is again the third argument I was talking about just a moment ago. It is a function that tells Express to proceed to the next step. In our case, go to the actual backend routes themselves. Now that we have this entire verify token function written, there's one last thing left to do before this works. We need to add this function to all of our routes up here. Like I said, we don't want anybody to be able to call any of these backend routes if they aren't authenticated in the first place. So I want to add this verify token to every single route in this file. And it's actually super simple to do this. All we need to do is to go into each individual route, and when we're calling the actual method like get, post, put, etc., we need to pass in an additional argument right here. And that argument is simply going to be the verify token function. So we'll say verify token, and we're just adding this as an argument. I'm going to take this code here, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it into every single one. That way, we're adding the verify token on every single one of our routes. Now let me actually explain to you how this works practically. Let's say I call the route to retrieve all of our posts. So we're looking at this route right here. Before we even get to all this code here, because this verify token argument is here, we're going to call that function first, which means this code is going to run. If it ever goes to either of these 400 statuses, meaning it was incorrect or something bad happened, and that means the actual code in our route, like this code being right here, is never actually going to run. Because in verify token, before we even get there, if there's a problem, we're actually returning a response already. However, if it does go through successfully, that's where calling this next argument comes into play. If we go back up here, we're calling verify token. Let's say a verify token gets all the way through and then it calls next. Once next is called, it signals to the route that we're ready to move on to the actual code. Meaning if next is successfully called, then only then will all this code actually run. Let's now test this to see if this actually works. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. I'm going to reopen our terminal, and I'm actually going to restart the server so it doesn't auto update. We'll make sure it gets all these new changes added to it. I'll restart the server right here. Then I'm actually going to go onto our site, and I'm going to go back to the landing page. And I'm also going to wipe out what's currently in our storage here so that we can start from scratch. First things first, let's try and bypass this login page by just going straight to the home page. I'm just going to go /home like this. And you can see that there is nothing here on our page. And I know there's errors here, but this is exactly actually what we want. You see this error here says 401 unauthorized. And that is actually this right here saying 401 authentication token is missing. And that is because we don't actually have any authentication token here in our session storage, meaning that this page is inherently unauthorized to get to. And now our backend is looking for that, and it's stopping it before it can even load anything on the page. Great, so we know this works now. Let's actually test the next thing. Let's go back here, and actually I'll keep my console open, clear this out, and I'm gonna actually go ahead and try to log in. So I'll do this austin@outlook.com, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, log in, go ahead and click it, and it says here that we are also unauthorized. Okay, so off camera, I actually was trying to solve this bug, and I found out in the backend, in the post routes here where we're verifying the token, this A in authorization actually needs to be lowercase, not uppercase, and that actually was the problem. So if I go ahead and save this file, I'm going to go ahead and open up our terminal and then restart the server. Now I'm going to go back to the login page here. I'm going to go log in like normal. And you can see this time, now everything displays correctly just because we changed the capitalization on this authorization. However, now that that's fixed, I actually, when I was debugging that, ran across another problem. And that's if I refresh the page, things don't load anymore, and I actually get the 401 unauthorized once again. And that's actually because whenever the page gets refreshed, we're setting our Axios headers right here. But whenever the page gets refreshed, it actually wipes this out. So basically what we need to do is find a way to, every time it refreshes, we need to watch for that. And we need to run this line of code again. It actually shouldn't be too bad to do. I'm going to try something here. I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know why I clicked that. I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. And I'm actually going to go into our root app right here. And I'm actually going to add some code in here. Let's wipe all this out. That will basically just watch for when the entire app refreshes. So I'll import a use effect here. And I'm going to write a use effect with an empty dependency array. So it'll run whenever the app first renders. Empty dependency array. And I'm going to paste this line in here. The only thing is this response variable no longer exists. But lucky for us, we are still storing this token in the session storage, which does persist upon every refresh. So actually in this use effect, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to say let token equals, I'm going to say session storage dot get item. That's going to be user. And then once we have that, then we can pass in right here, bearer is equal to token. However, we only want this to actually run if there is a valid token in the session storage. So let's actually write an if statement. Let's say if token, and then we're going to put that inside right here. And now theoretically, every time the page refreshes, this should run. It'll grab a token from session storage, which does persist through a refresh. And if it does exist, it'll reset the Axios headers. So I'm going to go ahead and save this page, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. And it looks like there is still a problem. Oh, Axios is not defined. It's probably fixed. Import Axios from Axios, save it here, and now everything's back on the page. If I refresh it, everything's still back, and we have not lost anything. And now that we've fixed those things, let's actually go back to our landing page here. Let's go to our session storage and let's actually wipe out this key right here. And let's do the original testing of seeing if it still locks us out. So theoretically, if I go to the home page, it shouldn't display anything. But now it seems to be working as intended. And just to make sure, just a last final check, we'll log in again. We will 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go here. And now we can see everything on our page because we are logged in and we are authorized. And now that we've checked the route to get all these posts, let's actually check and see what happens if we try and create a blog post. Hopefully we should get an unauthorized message as well. Let's go and clear out the user here. Let's go ahead and refresh this page. And it'll still show this on the page here. But when we go and do this and we try and just fill something out, okay, it actually wiped it out. Let me go preserve log so I can show you this time. So it doesn't wipe it out. Let's go this, and it'll say post 401 unauthorized, which is perfectly as intended. Not only can we not see the post, but we can't create a blog post either because it won't even let us submit it. Now that we know this works, let's move on to the next step. Obviously, it's nice that we stop any backend functionality from happening if the user isn't authorized. But what about the front end? Is there a way that we can stop the user from even navigating to these pages in the first place? Because we're using session storage, we can't 100% really guarantee this, hence why we did the backend stuff in the first place. But what we could do is just in our front end, check to see if there is a user object in our session storage, and if there's not, then we can just redirect back to our landing page. To do that, I'm actually going to go into our code here, and I'm going to navigate to our layout component, which we have actually not touched in quite a long time. If you'll recall, this layout is the parent component to all of our front-end pages that contain a navbar on them, which means every page except for the landing page. And that's actually perfect for us because the landing page should be the only one where you can be unauthorized. We can just do a super simple check in this layout component to see if the session storage has a token in it. So let's just go in here into the function. Let's just say let user equals session storage dot get item, and that will be user. And then what we can do is write an if statement saying if the user doesn't exist, we can redirect. So we'll say if not user, meaning the user does not exist, then we want to navigate back to the landing page. And to navigate, we know that we're going to use the use navigate hook. So let's import use navigate here. And then let's make an alias like we normally do. Const navigate equals use navigate. And then we just want to call this navigate function. And let's pass in the route of our landing page, which is just a slash with nothing else after it. Now, right now, this whole layout component doesn't actually have any reason to ever re-render, which means that this code isn't really going to run the way we want it to. We actually want to add a use effect hook to get it to run every time a session storage changes. So we're going to do a use effect, and we're going to wrap all this in a use effect here. We're going to do this, the function. We're going to paste this inside the use effect. Oops. We're going to paste this in here. And then since user is a dependency, we want to add that in the dependency array. This will make sure that if we were to take an action like log out from this page and we were to delete the user from session storage, this layout component would automatically pick that up and then redirect us to the landing page. And while we're here, speaking of logging out, let's add that real quick so I don't need to keep going in here and manually wiping out my session storage. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And then I'm going to, and you can see it actually took us back to the landing page here automatically. And I'm going to go to the nav bar actually. And then I'm just going to add a button. I guess I'll add it right here. And I'm just going to say, it'll say log out. And then on click, all we're going to do is something super simple. We're just going to call session storage dot remove item. And we're going to remove user from session storage. Now, real quick, let's test this to make sure it works the way we want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And let's actually log in. Get our login information. Get on this page. And now we have this kind of really badly styled logout button. We'll do the styling later. But now if we click logout, it looks like it didn't actually log us out. So let me check real quick. Okay, so yeah, I actually did wipe out the session storage. It just didn't redirect back to the landing page. So we can actually have a quick workaround and just force it to go back to the landing page. So I'll just write a quick function, handle logout. And here we'll just call this line. And then we're also going to call, we're going to get use navigate in here as well. Import use navigate. We'll say let's navigate equals use navigate. And then we're going to call it in this function as well. Force it to go back to the landing page. And then here, we're just going to pass in that function. We're going to say handle logout. So I go ahead and save this file. I'm going to go back to the landing page and let's log in and try this again. Let's go austinalec.com, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the password, log in. And now let's go log out. And you can see it takes us back to the landing page, which means it is probably working as intended. Next, let's try testing out other routes to other pages if we're not yet logged in. If I try and now go to /home up here in the URL bar, you can see it actually just redirects me back to the landing page. I can't even get there by manipulating the URL. If I try /about, it does the same exact thing. I can go /contact, same thing happens. It keeps redirecting us back to the landing page. Let's now move on to the next thing. A moment ago, I talked about how whenever we verify the user in the backend, we could add the user object to the request body in case we need it. One place where we actually will need it is whenever we're creating a post. If you remember, we made each post have an author field, and we've kept it empty thus far. So if I go to our post routes here, and we look at where we are creating a post here, you can see we have this author field. And right now it does say request.body.author, but that is empty on the front end when it's passed in. So this is always set to none. And I can actually show you that if we go into our Mongo database here, look at our post, and you can see these names here. These names are just made up. But if I were to create a post like manually on the site right now, it would not have any author filled in. Now in our middleware, we're actually passing in the user data to the request body. So let's actually add the author information when we're creating a post. So we'll add it right here in this field. Whenever we're storing the user in the middleware, we're storing it in request.body.user. And then for the author, let's actually grab their ID. So let's say request.body.user.id. And it's actually just as simple as that. We've just added and created a way for us to give an author to a blog post that we create. Now let's actually save this. I'm going to go ahead and restart the server. And I'm going to test this actually. So let's go do this, restart the server. Let's go back to our page here. Let's re-log in. And then I'm going to go to the create post page. I'm going to go here. I'm just going to do some sample stuff, just random letters. Do this, click submit, and it looks like it went through. So I'm going to go ahead and check this. Let's look at our post here. And there should be a fourth post right here. And you can see this author ID that we have in this field should, in theory, so it's 666273, should match my ID and my user. Yep, 666273. This now gives us an easy way to connect each blog post to each of the users. So now these posts actually are related in some way. One unique thing that this will actually allow us to do is pull all blog posts that belong to a single user. For example, the user that's currently logged into the site. And now that we have that, let's actually build out the final page on our site before we call it good. And that's going to be the profile page. This page we'll just make super simple for right now, and it'll just contain a couple of things. Let's say it'll have your name, the date you joined, and then a list of the blog posts belonging to you. We already actually have the skeleton for this file. It should be in profile.jsx. So let's head to this file and let's get to work. First of all, we know we're going to be making a list of blog post cards, kind of like we're doing here on the homepage with these cards. So let's go in here and let's import that blog card component that we made a couple episodes ago. So it's not autofilling. Let's do a blog card from, it should be components / blog card. We're also going to use useState and useEffect. So let's import those as well. Import useState, and we'll also import useEffect. Lastly, we're going to be needing the getAllPost function too. So let's import that. Import getAllPost. That one's not autofilling either. So getAllPost from, and that should be from API. Let's first make two pieces of state, one for the post on the page and one for the user themselves. So for the post, we'll say const post set post equals useState, and we'll default it to an empty array. For user, we will default it to an empty object. We'll say user set user equals useState as an empty object. Next, let's make a useEffect with an empty dependency array so that we can specify the behavior for when the component first renders. So we'll give this empty dependency array here. And just like every single other time that we're loading in data from an API, we're going to write our own function in here. We're going to say async function. Let's just call it load user data. Do this, and then we'll make sure to call it here at the bottom of the useEffect. Now, the $1 million question is, what do we actually put inside this function here? Well, before we call getAllPost up here, it would be smart to retrieve our user information first. How can we get that information? And actually, there's an easy way to do it, and that's by decoding our authentication token that we have in session storage. Remember that this token here, this string, is just an encrypted string of our user data, and we can decrypt it to get our data from it. In order to do that, we'll need to install that same JSON Web Token library in our frontend. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal. Let's open one up here and make sure we are cd'd into our frontend folder. And then I'm going to write npm install JSON Web Token, same as before. Once I've done that, I'm going to import a function in here called jwt_decode. And that is actually from JSON Web Token. This function does exactly what it says it does. It decodes, meaning decrypts the token and breaks it into its original parts, which is our user data. So now in this useEffect, let's actually call that. So let's first grab the token from session storage. We'll say const token equals session storage dot get item user, because that's where it's stored. And then we can call this jwt decode. So we'll go here. And we will say, we'll call it decoded user. We're going to set it equal to jwt decode, and we're going to pass in our token. If all goes well, we should now have our user data stored in this decoded user variable. Next up, let's make a new variable, and let's actually get all of our posts. So let's do this. Let's say const all posts equals, and this is what we're going to call the get all posts from our API. We're going to say get all posts, just like this, and we'll actually make sure to add the await in front of it, because this is an asynchronous function. And you may be wondering, why are we getting all the posts for this page? Well, glad you asked. Now that we have all the posts and we have the user information, we can easily filter out the posts that belong to this particular user and then display them on the page. To do that is actually pretty straightforward because JavaScript has a built-in filter function. If we want to use it, we can just say, let's make a new variable for it. We'll say const filtered post. We'll say equals all posts dot filter, and this is the built-in JavaScript method. We'll say post for an argument, and we're going to say filter all posts, where the author of the post is equal to the decoded user's ID. And this magic line here will return an array of all the posts where the post author is equal to the ID of the current logged in user. Meaning if I'm logged in, this variable here will now store all of my posts that I've made. The last thing we're going to do in this useEffect is store that in our React state. We already made a state variable called post. So let's go set post, and we're going to set that to filtered post. And then for our user information, we're going to do that as well. We're going to say set user, and that is stored in decoded user. So now we have our filtered post up here in this state, and we have the user information in this state. And with that, we should be good to go. We have both our current user stored in React state as well as the blog post that belong to them. All that's left is to write out in the JSX so it displays on the page. So we'll actually just be super basic. I'm going to write labels for each field. So let's do a couple labels here. I'm going to do 3 labels. We'll have one for name, we'll have one for email, and then we will have one for join date. And then for each one of these, let's just do like a, I don't know, something like a header 2. Let's do for each field. And then for each field, we'll just want to do whatever the information for the user is. So we'll say user.name. This one will be user.email. And then this one will be user.joinDate. We go ahead and save this file. It looks like our page blinked out. So let's check our console here. And it says source API does not provide an export name getAllPost. Let's check that. So we have getAllPost. Let's go into our API here. Oh, it's just getPost. Okay, sorry, that's my bad. I'm getting lost where we're working in your profile. Let's just do getPost like this. Save this file. Let's refresh this. Looks like we're still blanked out. It says cannot read properties of undefined. Actually, let's reload this page here. Let's go ahead and get out of here. Looks like we still have a issue here. Okay, so off camera, I tried messing with this decode function from that JSON Web Token library, but I was having a bunch of problems with it, so I'm actually using another library just called JWT-decode. So if you want to get this library, just make sure you can go into your terminal and then just run the command npm install JWT-decode like this. And then like I did here, you can import it just like this. And then on this line, instead of calling just the JWT_decode, we're going to call this .jwt_decode and then pass in our token. And this will actually decode the user for us instead of doing what we were doing earlier. And I also just realized this getAllPost, we changed the import but didn't change this. So let's change this back to getPost. Let's save this page. And now let's actually map over the blog posts and display them as blog cards, kind of like we have here on our homepage. So I'll go back here. And in here, I'm going to write a map statement. So I'm just going to do, it should be in post right here, or it should be post plural. And we will say post.map. And for each post, we're going to return some JSX. For each one of these posts, we want to render out one blog card component because after all, that's what each one of these little components is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just render in blog card because we've already imported it into this file. And then remember, for each one of these components, we need a post prop. So we're just going to go ahead and give it post, which is this argument right here. Then let's go ahead and save this file. And now you can see this post is right here. And that makes sense because as you can see in our database, if we go ahead and look at this post here, that is the only one with an actual valid author ID. I'm actually going to test something out here. I'm going to copy this ID. I'm going to go into one of these random posts here and I'm going to edit it. And let me open up this screen all the way. I'm going to edit in here. And then for, let's see, we want to get the author. Let's change this field. Instead of saying John Smith, we're going to make it equal to my ID. I'm going to go ahead and update it. And now let's actually test. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this back down. Go up here, refresh the page. And now we have this post on my page as well because it thinks that I am now the author of it. And of course, this looks very, very ugly, but don't worry because we're getting to the styling episode very, very soon. And with that, we're going to end this episode here. In this episode, you'll learn how to protect your backend routes through proper authorization protocol, how to handle encrypted user information in the front end in the form of an authentication token, and also how to create a profile page for a user where we're extracting their important details. In the next episode, we're going to cover media management, and by that, I mean being able to add images and photos to our website. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next episode.